Jane Carter found it quite fulfilling to observe a five-eyed extraterrestrial with 17 medals on his. She was surrounded by 12 members of the Suriki Elite Enforcement Unit after fumbling with a pair of shackles on her chest. Wearing spotless, iridium-plated uniforms that likely cost more than her college tuition, they stood shoulder to shoulder. Degree the cuffs, but they were designed for Jane and someone with tentacles. Jane's snark was overdeveloped and she only had the typical 2 arms. She claimed she would help, stretching out her wrists with a lot of patience, but I left my foreign law enforcement handbook behind. Commander Z-Roll, the closest officer and proud owner of all 5 of those jittering dummies back on Earth, his jaws twitched. "You're under arrest." "Don't make fun of the honor of Jane," apologized for not understanding that your honor comes with the Siki treatment. When the cuffs finally snapped shut with Velcro, Z-Roll took a step back with a solemn. Instead of hearing deafening ovation, he heard Jane's old Casio wristwatch scrape. Raising an eyebrow at that object, she remarked angrily against the alien, Alloy being careful. They didn't laugh, of course, during the Reagan administration. Jassy wasn't recognized for sarcasm, comedy, or anything else that wasn't enforcement order, and the ideal stance for a ceremonial blade at Ambassador Jane's sentencing, Toned and Carter Z-Roll are accused of subverting the Galactic Protocol. Jane blinked emotionally as a result of the weaponized speech and emotional instability. 1. He scowled at you, causing the Varick ambassador to cry for 47 minutes. His tie appeared to belong on a rejected figure skating costume, I exclaimed, setting the table on fire with tears. Jane responded, "It wasn't personal." He requested comments, saying, "You also caused global terror on I Taught Them about sarcasm. Was June 7th. "You're welcome." Zial made a pointed gesture. As the guards gathered, Jane was led down the docking passage with her handcuffs gleaming. The floor buzzed beneath the flashing lights, quivering with that strange antiseptic rhythm that was exclusive to ships constructed by beings that didn't sleep outside the Galactic Assembly's portholes, like a sermon in metal. The Intrepid Harmony, the flagship, towered over 1,000,000 tons of Jane recognized the kind of gleaming marble rooms and diplomacy threats that she had passed through its corridors under less dramatic circumstances. But this time she returned, sort of, with the guards pushing open the doors to the trial chamber. There were lighting panels and awful 12-species furniture in the area beyond, portrayed gelatin bark, feathers, scales, and, in one instance, sensitive gas in each delegate was extremely uneasy, and Jane was still in handcuffs. Ambassador Carter went forward, and her sluggish speech was immediately translated into ear by a humming device that belonged to the transparent green entity Elder Thrick, whose voice often reminded her of NPR at 2 in the morning. "You are charged with Jane cocked, her head in violation of Article 19 of Interstellar Conduct, regarding the use of words as weapons, which is a simplification yet true." Went around the room, a few diplomats mumbled one and others turned away. In fact, Thrix raised what appeared to be an eyebrow. "Do you deny that you are involved in interstellar affairs?" Has sparked discontent, although I disagree that unrest is always a bad thing, as Jane occasionally stated. Even if there is diplomatic order, the pot needs to be stirred. If the order is stale, a hand banged into the pot. Jane remarked, "I'm starving. Do we get snacks during the meal?" The table was sufficiently crowded. This, according to Galactic law, I should have a glass of water and at least a protein snack. She shrugged, the cuffs jingling. "You take this lightly, you weird blue liquid." Before anyone could reply quietly, you made the error of taking me lightly. When the wall began to chirp, Z-Roll strained and blinked slowly throughout the remainder of the image appeared on the central screen of the surveillance feed from the docking bay as the room turned toward it, revealed a short, round woman with silver hair standing at the gate. She had a flowered purse and wore a blue cardigan with little embroidered cats pushed into a difficult bun. She waved and grinned as if nothing had changed since the 1980s. Jane smiled as one of the delegates yelled at her orthopedic sandals. Technically, Edith Carter is not military. She is security. Zyra leaned in. Then why is she here? It's my mother. The room fell silently. Jane nodded as galactic law permits. Satellite your mother. Thrick repeated slowly. I filed the documentation, with Zyro triple-stamped, and each diplomat was legally compelled to bring a psychological support entity. Was already tapping on a console when his jaws clicked, and it seemed like Jane, added, I think she brought banana bread when she asked to enter an hour ago. Thrick's gaze was fixed on the television, which now focused on Edith taking a tiny tin from her toad and presenting it to a terrified security robot. She is not typical, and Jane acknowledged that she is more Texan. A few apprehensive murmurs followed the pause. Ambassador Carter, Thrick said. Cautiously, does your mother figure only threaten those who disrespect her or interrupt her stories? Table etiquette? A deeper uneasiness shook the room once more, the kind that Jane witnessed, when she realized that although the rules had been followed in theory, the result was illogical. They are all stony-faced insectoids with flashing gill and amphibious sensitivities. Each of them was perplexed as the floating orb lowered its illumination. None of them had a protocol for Earth moms, despite their mastery of commerce warfare, diplomacy. She once used just a pocketbook and a lemon rop to stare down a raging bison. Jane responded softly. I'd like to add that she can't be allowed in Zyrol because she's already past security. Suggest that you give her tea. The tribunal room door buzzed. The air altered as it froze, then gently opened, and Edith Carter entered. One of the representatives from the Frondarian pollen race actually gave a powerful sneeze. Edith stopped to look around the room. Her eyes were gentle yet perceptive, and she walked with a she saw Jane's face and felt the slow majesty of someone who could take over a small country while knitting a sweater. Jane smiled and softened. There's my girl, saying, Hey, Mama, you didn't tell me. Zayal tried. I almost wore the wrong shoes because they had such beautiful carpets. Did you truly not have permission to enter? Edith glanced at him. Zayal stammered as she walked forward, saying, I brought banana bread. Madam! She turned to wheat, fresh eggs, and a little nutmeg without any artificial preservatives. I don't want to disrupt all of this wonderful judging, but my daughter has been imprisoned without permission. Jane witnessed what I consider to be awful manners, as much as a cheese stick. The moment of bewilderment, the cerebral flurry to find cultural precedents, and the knowledge that none existed, Edith set. She took a folded piece of paper out of her purse after placing the bread on the tribunal seat. I would like this Earth document, known as a PDA resolution, to be entered onto Thinking About the PT Parent-Teacher Association, Jane whispered. Don't undervalue their influence. Edith nodded. I presided over this committee in 2037, handled a raccoon infestation and renegade school boards. You think this tribunal terrifies me? No one responded. Jane leaned back a little, her handcuffs now appearing to be decorative, and Zayal removed his throat. I'm in the middle of a 3-day period, and we're in the middle of a formal hearing. Edith responded, bake sale prep, but now my priorities have shifted. I'm not sure if your presence will make things more difficult, but hopefully so. Another small sniffling sound came from someplace in the rear, and Jane turned the Geller. Six's jelly-based envoy was sobbing silently, leaking goopy tears. He muttered, She reminds me of my hatch mother, and grinned. I'm happy to learn that everyone occasionally needs a good mother, sweetie. Jane glanced around the room at the wet eyes and trembling mandibles of others. Edith hiccuped, took a handkerchief out of her purse and gave it to a slimy diplomat who instantly broke apart. She didn't flinch, incidentally. I think, Jane remarked, we can call recess. Zero's mouth opened and shut, whispering, Yes, maybe we should. Jane went to her mother and asked, "How's the garden back home?" The new neighbor tried to steal one of the peppers that were growing wild, and he ended up spraining his wrist in the process. The tribunal stayed motionless as he stumbled over his own ego, and there was silence. Jane, still wearing handcuffs, reclined back and grinned as the sobs reverberated throughout the room. The most dreaded extraterrestrial court in the galaxy went from judicial rage to existential disarray in about 20 seconds, and Jane's handcuffs only needed to click open once, thanks to a mother from Plano, Texas, with the slightest hiss, as though even the security system was doubting itself when Edith Carter was around. Delegates sniffed and the tribunal room remained, stuck in its bewildered silence. Blinked, uncertain whether the technique required force fields or tissues. Some just looked at Edith as if she were a top predator dressed in polyester, but Edith remained unmoved. Checked for chafing and stroked her daughter's wrists. "I told them not to put my girl in handcuffs," and she loudly whispered, enough for Zyro to hear that Jane has always leaned in and that she bruises easily. "I raise 3, and you're all ready. Undermining galactic law just 5 minutes here." "This is nothing, lads, honey." Zayal's words came back from within clenched jaws. Edith's eyes narrowed. "This tribunal is not a family reunion shame. Have you learned anything about hospitality?" He tried to restore order, but his voice floated. "Madam Carter, although your entry was unconventional, it seems that you, Galactic Provision 12 and Theta Clause 9, provide legal protection for presence. Although you are the comforting entity," Edith smiled softly and nodded slowly. "If you didn't want to be the first to use this clause in such a dynamic way, you shouldn't have drafted the law that way." Jane gave Thrick a half-smile when Texans arrived with baked delicacies and a purpose. "If you invite lawyers to the cosmos and leave loopholes, that's what you get." "Are you a lawyer?" Thrick questioned. "But I was raised by one," Jane replied, "and she's currently opening a lemon rop with deadly intent." Edith was, in fact, loudly removing the candy with each wrinkle of the rapper who had sobbed sounded like a countdown to the floating jelly. "Ambassador. She reminds me of the ancient tales of the Fire Mothers, the primal guardians, the ones who established regulations," and Edith's countenance softened as she broke bones. "You're a cute puddle of slime, aren't you?" The tribunal gathered around a huge semicircular as Jane coughed. When Edith took the auxiliary seat next to Jane, the dais was blazing with natural light. Behind them, a screen sprang to life, showing documents taken from Earth's archives, including Jane's file, language disturbances, cultural rebalancing violations, and initially several diplomatic missions for offenses of, after she made a joke that led to a small-scale conflict between two pride-based species, the phrase linguistic terrorism was created. And one verified emotional event involving sadness on a global scale, followed by a second file that flickered in Edith's. Her digital dossier had been scraped from local open Earth data. There was no official galactic file. Honorary Sheriff's Deputy PDA President, 3-time Chili Cook-Off winner, ceremonial but armed, and chair of the Jane Didn't Blink You. So how is this relevant? Neighborhood Watch. Zyal squinted. Edith clicked. Her tongue when you attempted to arrest someone with the moral authority of a whole suburb. Your counsel is lacking in seasoning. You have carefully invoked your right to serve as your daughter's psychiatric counselor, Madam Carter Thrick interrupted. Are you ready to present a defense during these proceedings? Edith pulled a stack out of her purse, of tabbed, color-coded, laminated note cards with footnotes. Darling Jane. I reared children without an index, you think? She tilted her head. Before you could spell existential revolt, you had folders on you. She lifted a glittering palm and said, "Please start editing." Her voice changed, but it wasn't louder. But deeper solid, the room leaned forward, and she didn't need to yell. My daughter is accused of subversion, but I want to know if she really defied the ceremonial hubris of delicate egos. She did not violate your laws. Revealed your anxieties? A quiet voice echoed across the crowd, and Edith went on. You discuss procedures as if they were holy books, but you let my girl to enter rooms using only her cunning and a pair of boots, and then you accuse her of being an ambassador when she uses M. Zerol interrupted, saying, Then you tried to hang her for being good at it. She gave the Vexorians the irony they needed. You people were just a passive-aggressive praise away from Madam Carter. We recognize your protective nature. The nuclear war held up a palm. Intuition, but because the accusations are severe, is banana bread? Edith asked as she approached. And cutting a piece, but since you made it yourself, we won't be sleeping over it. Naturally, Thrick inquired, glancing. Down at his glistening fingers, May I have a sugar Jane, stifled a smile as a gelatinous piece. Help yourself. 3 pseudopods were stretched by the ambassador toward the plate Zyrol seed. This is a Edith retorted that the court of interplanetary law is a farce, and it's not even that good. I've seen better organized ones. PDA baking sales. Jane is now cool and collected. She's not mistaken when Zyrol yelled at you. Used a quotation from an Earth action movie to sway a Decian peace negotiation. Shouted aloud during a toast, to which Jane replied, causing the audience to erupt in laughter. My actions stopped a missile launch from occurring, while your actions created instability, Jane added. I taught them the chicken dance after he shifted in his chair and the incident with the Krent ambassador's wedding. Zial snarled. It brought both families together. She desecrated tradition. Edith responded. Just not the kind you're used to. Another envoy was a golden-eyed amphibian. Cleared her throat, saying that whereas human approaches are unconventional, so are their outcomes. No other diplomat has made such a significant reduction in conflict metrics because no one understands how to deal with them. They all snapped, quoting movies and wearing odd clothing, and converse in riddles. That day, Jane's t-shirt said, Houston, we have sarcasm. Edith folded her arms. Are you scared of my daughter's intelligence or just that she is chaos and doesn't play the way you expect? Zyro added. Jane smiled somewhat, but only if you demand order at all costs. Held briefly before being thick-sided, but regardless of emotion, there are still protocols, but there is still one last charge. The screen flickered and a file opened. Jane Carter Zyro leaned forward. Your comments have the potential to spread psychologically. Your humor and mannerisms are seeping to the system's security staff. Jane struggled not to smile as ambassadors laughed at her quotes. Officers have been observed doing the Earth eyebrow gesture at inappropriate times. Edith leaned forward. You've infected the very soul of intergalactic diplomacy. Do you want peace, or do you just want quiet obedience? Jane asked the room, which to me seems like a cultural exchange. I think their irreverence is evident because they waited before the jelly ambassador spoke up again. A hint of refreshment was followed by another nod from the amphibian diplomat. As I looked at them, I wondered if it was adaptability rather than infection. What would you recommend at Jane to modify the codes and lower the charges? Edith replied, This is its rebirth. But Zyal growled, This is the fall of order. My kid did not break your rules. She created them. You cannot impose laws on culture or stifle individuality. We will recess for deliberation. The room sighed softly, empty almost silently, save for Edith's footwear slight squeak. Jane Edith started folding her note as she sat back and massaged her wrists, saying, That was something. I simply thought I'd bring them up because cards have always been a mess magnet. Thank you, Mom. Let's watch how Edith responds the next time she says, We bring your Aunt Arlene. She's got even stronger opinions. Jane laughed. Before they could speak again, the door opened and the door returned by itself. We cannot expune. They handle Texas squared. We can commute the charges, but your record, he added. Jane nodded. Fair. With one caveat. She arched an eyebrow, saying, Your mother is still on the Diplomatic, Jane blinked. Registry as a cultural advisor. You wish to add Edith Carter to... Now that she's in danger, it's better to have her with us than against Jane. Edith grinned and turned to face her mother, who was drinking from a thermos. Let's demonstrate to the galaxy the proper way to behave. The alarm wasn't intended to go off at a diplomatic meal, particularly not when the menu featured Edith Carter's handmade cornbread and vegan-friendly space risotto, which by all accounts had, in less than 3 days, delegates from 12. Species became an interplanetary sensation. Had attended this unofficial human-paced potluck, and laughter and smiles had been shared. Tentacles had been exchanged, and the art of the handshake had been reluctantly learned. The gleaming corridors of the daring harmony were filled with the sound of stuttering klaxons when the sirens sounded. The most telling human-designed Jane shot to her as the sound was harsh and chaotic. Feet looking at the ceiling already. Did someone tamper? That's not normal. Thrick's transparent skin turned from green to pale purple as he queried, With the alert system? Jane whispered. No. A 1984 Earth-grade panic siren model that indicates a compromised system. Perhaps they simply had such a spectacular outburst that it activated the backup code. She glanced to Edith, who was standing composedly at the cornbread being sliced at the refreshment table with the same elegance that one might use to disarm a Jane questioned, Bomb, you do something yet? Edith answered, putting a piece inside. A cotton napkin, but I picture the doors flying open and a battalion of Commander Jane led grassy security drones into the area, but Zyro was not recognized. He was younger, more irate, and less terrified of Edith, but he didn't remain that way for you are to accompany us, lengthy Ambassador Carter yelled, holding a 2-barreled pulse gun at Jane's chest. You are designated a Class C subversive entity, in the room with immediate effect. Backed off, a few ambassadors stood up and one even snarled while standing. This is ridiculous. We are in the middle of a conversation. The Central Enforcement Corps issued the order, and there are currently no charges. After reviewing her record, the commander yelled, Her words are destabilizing her. Jane slowly lifted both hands, palms out, letting me guess that your presence was too risky. Ignored the paperwork once more, and the drones fanned out behind him. Jane took a step closer as red lights pulsed across their forearms, their tiny claws writhing like caffeine-induced spiders. She is protected under diplomatic law because she passed between them unarmed and inconsequential. Protocol, the commander faltered, but Edith cleared her throat, and everyone looked, I don't know why, but she turned and walked into the middle of the room like a woman walking into a church with blood in her eyes. She responded, You are not authorized to speak, in a strong, quiet voice, like weapons in my dining room. You brought guns to Edith, proceeded to point one at my child, at lunch, which isn't brave. Civilian Edith opened her purse and saw rudeness wrapped in metal. One drone recoiled as the commander flinched, and Jane muttered, Oh no. A solar flare was the name of the lipstick tube that was prohibited on 3 premium moons. Jane gently stated, You're making a mistake by being too distracting. She's not a technically dangerous. I've observed that purse turn off a custom station. The drones moved it 3 times, while the commander remained motionless and restrained both people. 20 seconds were spent before the first drone attacked, spinning Edith's purse and swinging in an elegant arc. Something inside clicked. The drone's chest burst with a tiny pop, and Jane's cinnamon scent wafted out. The second one activated a shield. Edith! And she never understood how her mother did that. Removed a roll of duct tape, ripped off a strip, and threw the tape at the shield, which lit before expanding. 6 layers of noise-canceling insulation, and 3 more of the greatest grandmother. Stickers in the world were applied to the drone. Edith walked up, put her purse on the ground, and reached inside without turning to see. It generated a thermos. When the cap was twisted, a pressurized torrent of hot liquid erupted, scorching the aiming at the nearest unit's sensors. "Is that coffee?" Jane murmured. Cafe Edith exclaimed, "Bustelo, it's hot enough to melt ego." Two drones backed off, but one did. Jane's instinct cried out as it lifted a massive stun cannon, and she lunged. But Edith beat her to it, and a VHS copy of Die Hard appeared, which she threw like a shuriken. Struck the drone system's sensor, lens on the cannon, bounced, and clattered to the ground. The out-of-date format caused it to glitch, stammer, and burst. Bruce Willis's innocuous hologram saying, "Welcome to the party, pal." "Hold fire!" the commander yelled as he fell back. "She's using temporal subversion." Tech Jane burst out laughing. "You fool the diplomats, it's a videotape." Weren't giggling, they were cheering, and then the place fell apart. Security reinforcements showed up, including 2 hover tanks, several drones, and an elite Wen. Edith questioned him if he had eaten breakfast. The telepathic regulator instantly fell apart. Jane hid beneath a table, took Edith by the arm, and pulled her into the hallway. "We must depart. I'm worried about my purse because they exploded into the hallway with alarms blasting the righteous defiance, and the scent of baked ozone lingered after them." He joined shortly after, breathing heavily and saying, "You've broken every interstellar safety code," in between breaths. "No," he said. Glancing over her shoulder, Jane clarified, "They broke the truce." Jane, a kindergarten teacher at Edith, stated anxiously, "Retired knits bakes. Arranges school fundraisers and once used a whistle alone to defuse a gang fight in a Walmart parking lot." With a coupon book, Jane retorted, "I can't protect you now. You don't need protection." "I'm going to call Earth, since you're simply giving me directions to the communications chamber. I'm calling Aunt Darlene Drispold in order to invoke planetary retaliation." The 3 of them scurried through the station, avoiding confused fire, and another Jane bolted. Word was spreading about a diplomatic incident as the reverberating sound of Bruce Willis phrases reverberated through the hallways. Cultural oddity and a security lapse brought on a pocketbook that got to the communications. Edith calmly started restocking her purse after Chamber Jane entered a security line. Jane opened the channel without asking what she was putting in it, but an emergency broadcast came on before her every time. The ship's screen illuminated, and a red warning sounded throughout the systems in 36 languages that alert human matriarch entities to the degree of emotional danger, apocalyptic. If they come across it, give tea and get down right away. Jane blinked. "Flag her," and Thrick muttered, "You know what this means? She's officially now a planetary class." "I don't like that word. It makes me seem like gas." As a deterrent, Edith zipped her handbag. "You just defeated a tactical assault. Team with household objects," Jane said to her mother, who turned to face her with calm enjoyment. I know there was a pause before Edith's gentle smile, but they started it with objects and 80s pop culture. "And loving, I only ever came to defend you, not to fight Janie." I know Mama's footsteps thundered down the hallway, and I wanted Jane's throat clenched. The surviving drones and diplomats surrounded the hallway Zyro as he stared. "Weary, I have a suggestion." Edith arched one eyebrow, and Zyal cleared his throat. "We'll depart this ship right away. You won't come back, but your position will remain unharmed, unpunished, and my daughter is under one roof." "Let's hear it," conditioned Jane. Came forward, and Zyrol looked straight at Edith. "When you gave us the recipe for banana bread," Jane blinked, and Zyrol appeared eerily. "The cafeteria employees have started rioting against the Varric ambassador, and we need it. Offered to wet a loaf. This is more significant than pride." Edith now appeared considerate. "Don't cut corners on the nutmeg and add 2 sticks of butter," she suggested. As the humans exited the communications, Zyro bowed the subtle but firm agreement. Chamber Jane said, "You just changed," as you can see by looking over her shoulder. I said as Edith threw her pocketbook over her shoulder, "Diplomatic protocol using pastry." The ship calmed as they returned, and I baked you sugar on purpose. No drone dared to fly as the diplomatic dock screens continued to flicker with warnings while delegates peeked from around corners. Block their path, Jane winked at the final surveillance camera in the hallway and said, "Yippa," in a whisper. Standing at the edge of the Galactic Assembly Central Dome, Carter was encircled by extraterrestrial leaders who had spent the previous 4. The hologram pact hung in the air as she spent hours debating if her mother's banana bread was an emotional weapon. The hologram's integrated artificial intelligence attempted to reconcile non-hostile manufactured. When things weren't going well with the planetary panic index, Thrix floated to Jane's side glows dimly, but it's promising that we've agreed on 37 of 40 clauses, the last 3 of which are where issues still arise. Jane pinched the "let me guess" clause 12. "Yes," Thrick whispered the official on the bridge of her nose. "In galactic diplomatic relations, she is not a human matriarchal entity," Jane whispered. "We're just Southern." But Thrick added, casting a drained look at the refreshment table, "Madame Carter is more powerful than most combat fleets at the moment." Several delegates gathered close by as he quietly sat at that exact table knitting a sweater for someone's Laurel ambassador child. One of them had tried to touch her in a clear display of dread masquerading as interest. He had not tried again. "Could we just give them the recipe and let them go?" he said. Jane muttered, "We did." And Thrick said that it caused 2 religious awakenings and 5 chemical alerts. Jane Zial approached with tight shoulders, flanked by officers who sighed. "Of course it did. Wore cooking mitts and aprons instead of weapons. This was his idea. Unofficially, it had been incredibly effective at disarming by diverting attention. Within an hour, Edith had them baking, and they now bowed to her in fear. Under a cheerful but erratic celebrity host, we have a Sue Cooks. Jane arched an eyebrow at Zyral's suggestion, which he delivered to her in a data pad. She scrolled through the peace accords and said, "We accept them with one condition." The condition was put in plain English, not code, and Earth will send in every high-risk diplomatic summit, a single human matriarch-class entity serves as an emotional peacekeeping presence. Texan with food and frequency biannual preferred setup. "Let me clarify," Jane responded slowly. "You want my mother as part of she either prevents war," Zero muttered, "or generates it in ways that result in weaponry as a member of a standing peacekeeping force." "Unneeded, and you don't mind that I'm not," Zyrol acknowledged, "but the jelly. Since Tuesday, the ambassador has been singing Earth lullabies, and someone has embroidered her face on our council." Jane looked over and saw that a velvet banner was now silently fluttering close by. "Mind your manners," the council stage sewed with a happy Edith clutching a piece of pie. And the Jane inquired, "Banana bread needs to be recognized as a cultural artifact." Zyal stated that we lost a scout ship due to interplanetary distribution only with a license. Yesterday, Jane blinked. Someone smuggled banana breadcrumbs to a syndicate of black market crumbs, and they created a cult. You understand how ridiculous everything is, yet you didn't flinch. Jane repressed a smile. "Despite winning the position of ambassador, you have altered the galaxy in ways I cannot even fathom. Understand that it was always about being heard, not about winning," she stated quietly. He paused, then turned to face Edith, where her mother was now, teaching a tall, 6-clawed reptilian envoy how to knit, and even after trying to focus like a baby on coffee, Edith grinned and patiently sat. "They want to make you an official person next to her," Edith added without looking. "Can I still bring a banana?" Edith, the upgalactic matriarchal peace consultant, nodded. "Bread," Edith replied, tying off a knot in the yarn, "is the only reason they're agreeing to this. I guess I can handle it if they need a mother figure to keep them in line. You'll be a legend, which I already am," Edith said. Jane laughed and thanked her mother as usual. The last ceremony started at dozens of races gathered in the dome during the dusk cycle, and treaties were unfurled. Even the sensitive gas beings wore tiny honorary rings that were encoded into crystal. The Banana Bread Resolution, a recently reached peace agreement, was ratified by 36 unanimous votes. Thrick gave the last remarks today, stated solemnly that we acknowledge a power bigger than ourselves and do not only sign a peace treaty. Tradition is more important than formality because we recognize the strength of human feeling. Erratic, unpredictable, and somehow consoling, he turned to Edith. May the first human matriarchal consultant to be formally appointed carry our... The ovation was loud, and she protected our discussions with her judging stares and delicate egos in her handbag. Delegates wept over one marriage proposal, which Edith graciously turned down for Jane and her, "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Jane said, as her mother waited for the Earth shuttle near the exit. "I've maintained harmony between toddlers and teenagers in a home with," Edith said, gazing up at the stars outside the dome. "I can manage the galaxy without air conditioning in Texas summers." Jane grinned. "No," Edith said. "You changed everything. You changed everything," she said with delight. "Did I just arrive when the shuttle doors opened and a pilot arrived?" "Edith paused," remarked Jane, leaning out Ambassador Carter, Madam Consultant, and coming. Glanced back and saw a number of ambassadors standing and waving. She nodded once and then moved. Inside, a voice sounded as the shuttle launched off the center broadcast, crackled throughout all systems, resonating from motherships to moons. "This is the Galactic Assembly. We affirm a new era of understanding and diplomacy. It is recommended that all member species revise their threat assessments in light of empathy and the occasional baked treat." The voice that emerged was a happy human male replica of the Earth to Galactic Assembly. Additionally, Mama Carter advises everyone to bring their own to the upcoming summit in Dallas. Jane gazed at her mother as she rested against the cabin wall, saying, I just made breakfast. Really did it," Edith said outside the galaxy. However, things were more subdued today, Kinder, and whenever disagreements arose and dialogue broke down, there would always be someone ready to respond. To threats, even a woman with a banana and a heart full of fire and a purse full of reason. Peace-stopping bread had never tasted so good.